Good morning, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone online, depending on where in the world you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you know, we are starting a third and final session of our seminar in water-related investment and economic development. Just a quick introduction. My name is Matthew Samel. I'm a senior manager in policy and insights at the Economist Impact, which is a research arm of the Economist Group based in London. And I have the absolute pleasure to introduce the panel today. As you know, this is a part of a three-session seminar. We have our first session last week focused on exploring the various social and economic impacts of water-related investments and specific opportunities in areas such as nature-based solutions. In our second session that just wrapped up a half an hour ago upstairs here in Stockholm, we have focused much more on the sort of investment side and the various tools and instruments for mobilizing investment, much needed investment in water more broadly. And we explored innovative tools and approaches such as blended finance, such as climate finance, water credits, and others. And in this session today, our esteemed panelists will really dig deeper into how we can mobilize the private sector funding and through various approaches, through various tools, and how we can bring this to life. How can we scale up in practice these investments in a sort of very practical way. So it's going to be a really interesting one. So just a sort of very quick introduction of the panelists, and then of course we will have a sort of a number of individual presentations, and then really open up for the sort of panel discussion that we really want to and encourage you to engage in, and so start thinking about the questions. So the moderator for the session will be Joel Kolker from World Bank, where he's a program manager for the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership. We have also then Mariel Burpo, who is a senior advisor in the Chief Development Office, at DFC. We have Dominic O'Neill, who is the Executive Director of Sanitation and Hygiene Fund. We will have Muchaya Sitali, who is a Government and Engagement and Partnership Specialist with Sanitation and Water for All. We also have Lionel Guon from the French Agency for Development. We also have Dr. Hyong Ryu from the Executive Vice President of K-Water. And we have Michura from the African Water Facility. And online we also have Max Vengavena, apologies for the pronunciation, who is the Deputy Director of Planning for Ministry of Water and Sanitation in Malawi. So it's going to be a really engaging panel. Please think about the questions, and I'll just hand over to Joel to kick us off. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks very much. I have to confess I've been looking to this session. This is my favorite topic, and if we come to the solution after an hour and a half, it will be a very productive use of our time. We have a very esteemed panel, and I want to turn it over to them in a minute. But I did want to put some context into this issue. Everybody knows the financing gap. Everybody knows about the private sector needs. But sometimes we don't talk enough about the public sector side of it, and I really want to suggest on the questions that you make sure that you look at the holistic problem. It's very easy to just talk about what government must do, but there are issues on the private sector side as well. I've been told to be very provocative, and I'm asking you to do the same. We're not doing well on this. We are not going to reach the SDG 6.1 and 6.2 goals. We have an obligation to get as close as we can. There are foundational issues that are inhibiting us, and I hope we talk about that during this session. So I don't want to go on too long on this, but please start writing your questions down, challenge people. Let's have a very robust dialogue about this, because as I said, we're in a lot of trouble on this issue. So we need to figure out a way forward, and there's a lot of players here. So with that, I'm gonna turn it first and foremost over to Satoli and ask him to take 5 minutes. Someone's monitoring the clock. I think there's a little electricity in your chair. If you don't make it, you'll start bouncing up or something. So please, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Joel. Good morning, everyone. So good to be here after many years, and I hope you're finding your water week going as smoothly as you hoped it would. So I'm here to talk about a handbook that we prepared at Sanitation and Water for All. We prepared this handbook for finance ministers about 2 years ago. Now, as Joel was talking about, there are a number of challenges that we know. So I will start just by laying the ground on things that we know to be true, either because they've been researched or they are stylized facts, and facts that actually we could also stand by. Just a few things about why is investing in water sanitation important. Now, I think I'm speaking to the choir, but I'll just highlight 5 because the rest of the book, you know it very, very well. So investing in water and sanitation has a 4-fold return on investment. That much we know. We know that inadequate investments in water and sanitation leads to losses that are estimated at 1.5% of global GDP. We know that pandemics and epidemics, COVID, Ebola, SARS, cholera, and others, highlight the human and economic impact of those that don't have services. You're still seeing Joel. You need to see me. No, not me. Some more. There we go. All right, thank you. Okay, so we know that these pandemics and epidemics, they have a significant impact on human life and the economy. And this is why Sanitation and Water for All just held a meeting for ministers looking at the triple crisis: economy, health, and climate. We also know that water and hygiene and sanitation targets are central to the achievement of several SDGs. I cannot think of many SDGs where that connection is so direct as we see it for water, sanitation, and hygiene across the SDG spectrum. Now, targeting water and sanitation investments to the poor provides the highest marginal benefit. It provides a significant amount in terms of benefits. We know these things to be true. And why don't we see the investments? Why don't finance ministers jump and say, this is where I'll put the money? So that was one of the rationale for the finance minister's handbook. Now, there are challenges, even in the face of these benefits. Investments for water and sanitation suffer from interlinked challenges of underinvestment and poor performance within our household. And by that, I mean within the sector. There is a vicious cycle at play. And this vicious cycle includes inadequate investments. So without adequate and ongoing investments, performance declines, undermining confidence in the sector's ability to deliver good services. Therefore, discouraging further investments. So we know that when we're not performing well, we won't get more investments into the sector, and we know that inadequate investments can also impact the performance. So with these challenges, we know that we need to turn this vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. Where there are more investments, there's good performance, that leads to more investments. Now, money alone, or the lack of it, is not the biggest of our problems. It is part of the problem, but it is not the only problem that we have. Part of it is around decision making. Part of it is around who are the decision makers that are influencing what's happening in the sector. And so while funding needs to increase at least 3 times to meet Sustainable Development Goal 6, money alone, or indeed the lack of it, is not the root cause of the water and sanitation sector's problems. We need political decisions to come into play. And that's why the handbook was prepared, in part to highlight these interlinkages across the ministries vertically as well as horizontally between the finance ministry and the local government as well as regional governments. Now, what does the what does the handbook contain? So this handbook contains examples, about 25 specific country examples on what can be done, practical things that countries have done to actually move the needle. And these examples focus on maximizing the value from existing public funding by incentivizing sector performance, improving subsidy targeting, and promoting better sector planning and management. These examples also focus on mobilizing more funding by setting up adequate cost recovery policies, reforming tariff systems, introducing earmarked taxes, and establishing an array of options for cross-subsidization. The third area, a critical area, is to increase repayable domestic finance through mechanisms that reduce perceived risks and pool finance at national, municipal, and household levels. And then the last one is to encourage innovation and the least explored new approaches, such as climate funds and social impact bonds to tap sources of finance rarely accessed by the sector so that they can come into the mainstream. So these 4 critical areas of intervention were presented and put forward to finance ministers. So I'll get now into my final part of my short discussion in terms of I have a minute, thank you. So the final part is how has this been applied? We have it on our website. It's been visited more than 5,000 times. We know anecdotally from different conversations with countries that it's been presented to finance and sector ministers in about 30 countries. We know that in some countries such as Zimbabwe, it was very instrumental in having discussions with the finance minister that led to an increase in the budget. We know that in some countries, this has been used to discuss with parliamentarians on how they could present examples to finance ministers during budget discussions. And it has also been used in preparation of other sector strategies, such as a climate strategy in Malawi, which used this handbook as input into preparation of that strategy. So this is a handbook that you could find useful with all the examples in there, 25 in total from examples across the globe, hoping to help finance ministers become part of the champions for water and sanitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Satoli. We're going to turn it over to Max, who is magically going to appear on the screen, I'm told. Max, can you hear us? There you go. Welcome.
Thank you, Joe, distinguished members, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Malawi. It's a great honor for us to share the discussion with alongside these experts in the field. We are privileged to share with you our experience in Malawi.
We're trying to figure out how to get your to hear you. So what I'd like to do is go to the next speaker, and as they're trying to figure this out, we'll come back to you. And I apologize. All right.
All right.
Okay. Chira, up to you. What's AFDB think about all of this?
I don't know if you can hear me, if the mic is working. So this session is really about turning on the investment tap. And I want to share with you about the Africa Urban Sanitation Investment Fund, AUSIF, as we call it, which is a newly created fund, or still in the process of actually being operationalized, to focus on the urban sanitation sector in Africa. And just thinking back why we're doing this, why we're setting up or working with other partners to set up this fund, is really because of the challenges of urban sanitation in Africa specifically, where the requirements to achieve SDGs require 20 times more investment than the current rate. Studies done by the African Ministers' Council on Water, showing that less than 20% of the estimated 69 billion required annually for sanitation infrastructure in Africa is actually being invested, so less than 20%, which shows that we won't reach the targets. It's also the realization that business as usual will not, make an impact, and so we need more innovation and think around how to mobilize more financing. Also considering the rate of urban growth in Africa, 3.5% per annum, which by 2035, it is projected that Africa's 1.8 billion population will be residing in urban centers. So obviously there is the challenge. And so the objective of AUSIF is to increase investment to the urban sanitation subsector in Africa. The idea is that AUSIF becomes a catalytic force for systemic change, bringing innovation and scaling impact in terms of investment in urban sanitation, using the city-wide inclusive sanitation approach. The AUSIF is being created to position itself really between service providers and governments on one hand, but also commercial and development finance institutions on the other, to facilitate alignment of sanitation activities and financing options. We plan to make AUSIF to enhance credibility and preparedness of service providers and governments, helping them to deliver more bankable projects. And how will it operate? The approach that will be taken is to support the SIWI's approach, including traditional sewer systems, centralized and decentralized treatment, but also applying locally tailored solutions. So basically not one approach for every city, but basically selecting technology that is suitable for specific needs. Using innovative approaches, combining financing and support to implement practical solutions, leveraging development and commercial finance, but also forming partnerships with different partners and stakeholders. What instruments will AUSIF deploy? So basically 3 main instruments. 1, grants to support upstream preparation. Second, funding activities to cover risk capital guarantees, generating investment project portfolios, and thirdly, providing technical support for transaction support, structuring and establishing PPPs to support the urban sanitation sector. So AUSIF will work with commercial finance institutions to develop new instruments to finance sanitation, but also working with partners. And the objective is to mobilize at least 320 million in the first 10 years of operation. So thank you very much, and I'll be glad to take questions thereafter. Thank you.
Max, can you see and hear us? Okay, Max, we can see you again. Can you try speaking?
All right, thank you, Joel. Just to confirm if you are able to hear me now.
Perfectly, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And glad to come back. So first of all, just to thank all of you for this opportunity that we could share Malawi's experience with regards to mobilization of public finance for investments in the wash sector. So I have a very short presentation actually that will just introduce our Minister of Water and Sanitation where I sit, and then just to share also with you some targets that we have set aside ourselves for in regards to the wash, and then also a couple of challenges we're facing, and then some strategies we're trying to address them. So probably you may assist with the beaming the presentation now. Joe,
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
We're just pulling it up.
Okay, thank you. But anyway, as the presentation is being binned, allow me just to share with the meeting that my Ministry of Water and Sanitation is a newly institution. Actually, we used to be a department, but then the government saw the need to have it as a fully fledged ministry. So since January this year, we've been a full ministry with dedicated focus to issues of water and sanitation in Malawi. So as a ministry, our role is to assist in the managing of the issues of water and the water supply, as well as managing the water resources. So we have the focus of both the rural areas as well as the urban areas. With regards to the urban areas, we have the water boards that we work with. As for the rural areas, we do directly provide the interventions in that area. And then with regards to the challenges that actually they are just before the challenges, the water sector targets that we've set ourselves, I'll just highlight and single out a couple. I've singled out the three. Those ones, the first one is to do with the reaching a target of the population that is using safely managed water. We would wish that by 2030, 100% of Malawians should have access to safely managed water. That's our target. And on the sanitation, we would wish at least 65% of the population to have access to improved sanitation services. And then with regards to OD, the open defecation, we want to bring that figure down to zero. Currently, it's something around 4-6%. So those are the targets. As you would see that the targets are also aligned to the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, among others, as well as we have our vision, the Malawi 2063, which we intend to, we aspire to be a middle income country by 2063. And therefore, we believe that to get to that point, we also need to pay attention to these targets in the wash sector. And that's, so we are working towards achieving that. But then to get there, I'll take you the next slide where we're talking of the financing aspects. With regards to the financing aspects, actually, our major source of financing in this sector is coming from the taxes. That's through the budgetary support. And then we have the transfers. These are the aid that we get. Also, then the tariffs. This is especially more relevant with the urban water, where we, depending on the tariffs that the water boards do charge. And then we have the concessional finance. With the concessional finance, largely this is where we're getting this from the international financing institutions, the likes of the World Bank. Thanks, Joel, to the World Bank. We get a lot of support. In fact, is the largest player with regards to financing the water projects in Malawi. Others include the African Development Bank also. See my brother from African Development Bank, who also benefiting a lot from there, as well as other international financing institutions. And then we have the commercial finance. This one is coming from the local banks in the country, but it's not yet up to much as like to the level of the other institutions. But then with all these combined, we still face the serious funding gap challenge. And that will take the next slide, where now we're highlighting the issue of the need for us to operate or to get to those targets I shared earlier on. We need about $276 million a year. But the reality is we only able to mobilize up to $151 million a year. So that huge financing gap actually poses a serious threat to our realization of the aspirations that we have. So we've tried to come up with some strategies, and I'll share in the next with you in this next slide. So those are some of the strategies that we've put in place so that we could probably mobilize more financing to fill in that gap. So the first one, the most recently, we just developed a financing, we're calling it climate resilient wash financing strategy, thanks to the support of UNICEF, WASH, IRC WASH, Water for People. And so we jointly developed this and we recently launched. The other one is the one you can see in the background if you're able to see that. So with this financing strategy, we think we're going to be more organized in mobilizing those resources. And thanks, I also heard from Sitari that you mentioned about financing strategies, which benefited from the book we authored. So indeed, we just started rolling that one out. And in addition to this strategy, we're looking at engaging more multilateral donors who could come in and we get the soft finances, as well as we are also putting our house in order by making sure that we improve on efficiencies. Because we see that we may get, but if we are not efficiently utilizing them, then that we're working. So just to quickly to share with them the efficiencies that we're doing, we are switching to more greener energies, using more of solar farms for pumping water. We also more into ensuring that every resource that we use is bringing in. We also leveraging partnerships where we want to see other players coming in, like NGOs, and then we see how best we could build on each other's synergy. So that's how we're doing it in Malawi, briefly. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Max. Very much appreciated. Lionel, you work for one of the organizations that's had the largest bilateral subnational program without government guarantees for a long time. You're now looking at public development banks. Do you want to tell us what you're doing in some detail?
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting French Development Agency in this panel. It's a real pleasure for me being here today, as my last visit to Stockholm for the World Water Week was about 10 years ago. I've been a little away from the sector in the last few years, so I'm eager to see what has changed or what has not. Before entering the topic of today's presentation regarding public development banks, I would just like to remind us, all of us, as we are speaking about commercial loans, concessional loans, guarantees, bonds, and so on, all financial instruments, just to remind us that you do not sustainably finance the sectors with those tools. You finance them with the 3Ts, as our colleague from Malawi correctly reminded us, the taxes, the tariffs, and the transfers. And this is where you have to start with. And I mean, where do we stand now? How about taxes? 15 years ago, 12 years ago, we had the Heath Equini declaration. Most countries from Africa were supposed to save 0.5% of their GNI for sanitation. Are we there now? I'm not sure. The transfers, well, they remain low. It's about $7 billion per year, sorry. It's an important amount, but it's far from being at scale. So you can try to increase it, but you won't make it lastly. And thirdly, the tariffs, well, we all know the difficulty for regulations of tariff, for decisions about tarification being more political than economics usually, so it's a complex topic. Well, that being said, if we are to bridge the gap, if we are to reach the about 200 billion US dollars that we need every year to finance the sector, we do need financial resources to bridge that gap. And of course, then you need to look into the finance. I'm sorry, I'm just taking my notes. Forgot them. So yes, you do have the private finance, of course, but in this sector it remains pretty low. It's about 7, we say, 7, 8, I don't know. We don't have the exact figures of the total financing, so it's good to try to increase it, but well, the sector is what it is. It will remain a sector with high capex expenditures, with low returns on investment, with high political risk. So that's why actually the international companies rather reduce their involvement in the sector in the last decade, and they are not anymore in the service provision, but more in facilities, DBOs, and so on, which is less politically risky. And so although there are a few success stories, I'm thinking, for instance, of Cambodia and PPWSA, you have a company, a public company going public and finding new ways of financing itself, but these success stories remain, unfortunately, at this time pretty rare. So you can have a look as well at the PDBs, the public development banks. What can they do? PDBs, they represent about $2,000 billion investment per year. So that's, well, that's a figure. Then it starts becoming interesting. It's about 10% of the total global investment worldwide. So that's a force. And they are players at every scale. You have IFIs, you have regional banks, you have national banks, and you have local banks as well. The difficulty with the PDBs is that being so diverse, we do not have a clear panorama of their activity, and we don't always know what they are doing and how we can bring them to the water sector. In this context, AFD steered the first Finance in Common Summit back in 2020 with the idea of having building a community which actually does not exist between the PDBs. We know they are. We didn't even know how many there were. We had to do a study to know there were like almost 500, and maybe we are missing some of them. So the first summit was held in Paris, the second one in Italy last year, and the next one will be co-hosted by African Development Bank and European Investment Bank next October. And in this context, I'm thinking of the role of PDBs. We kicked off a water finance coalition, so it's like a sectoral initiative trying to think, well, what can we do in our sector? Well, how can we get a part of these $2,000 billion per year? And so we started it, and now it's shared by CAF, the Caja Andina de Fomento. The secretariat is assumed by RRC at the moment, and AFD is now acting as a co-chair. This coalition is still pretty new, less than 2 years then. Still, it has some interesting result, I think, for such living time. And I think these first successes are a traduction of the need that the actors had to gather and to be able to share experience, okay? So first of all, there's a role of peer network, so there were already quite a few meetings. There's also a role of political advocacy, so like with joint declarations, which was presented at the last FIX. But also maybe most interesting to me at the time is the knowledge production, and specifically a study that tried to determine more precisely the role of national PDBs. And national PDBs, they are huge. They are the largest part of these $2,000 billion per year. We don't know all of them, and that study showed things well. We thought it was like that, but the study confirmed that they are very important in size. They have financial tools which are adapted to the sector, including money for preparing operations and so on. They are very complementary to the IFIs. For instance, they can more easily reach mid-size or small-size towns, and also they have a different type of impact on the national policies. They are linked to the government, so they are strong actors locally. But many of them do not even have a water mandate. So we can work trying to give them a water mandate. And when they have one, another finding of the study is that they do not try to push forward the fact that acting for water is also acting for climate. And so they do not they do not benefit from the climate money that they could have nationally because they do not properly engage into that way, so we can support them in that direction as well. And this is why very recently, last June, we published a handbook for how to account for climate finance within the water sector aimed at these national banks, trying to support them. So the coalition is still very new, and the question is now, what can you bring to the community and what do you want as a group of actors? And that will be the topic of one of the workshops we are holding this week in Stockholm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lionel. Meryl?
Hi, I'm Meryl Burpo, and I'm with DFC, and DFC is the U.S. Development Finance Institution, and we are focused on bringing private sector finance, mobilizing private capital in developing countries and emerging markets. And as you heard today, there are lots of opportunities to finance government and public sector projects, but we think that by mobilizing private capital, we actually have a great opportunity to drive investment in the water sector and make a difference in what happens there. I wanted to give you just a quick idea of what we do. We have sponsored in the past or lent to or provided equity for private investments in projects ranging from desalination plants in Algeria to water pipelines in Jordan, from water vending systems in India to drip irrigation in Africa. And as you've heard, the demand is great. The public sector resources are small, making it even more important, that we can participate by providing private capital for things like providing clean water, conserving fresh water and marine fisheries, and supporting, national security interests where there are depleted water resources. Wanted to give you a quick idea of some of the projects that we have supported in the past, because I think that helps you to understand best what we are capable of doing in other countries. We do provide equity investments either directly or through investment funds. We provide direct loans and loan guarantees, and we provide political risk insurance, which you'll hear in a minute, has been a really important part of our work. So one of the items that I want to mention, one of the projects is with Water Equity, water.org. It's a fund investment in water infrastructure projects globally. Azure is an interesting project. We've lent to them for rural water infrastructure projects in El Salvador. We give them a big pool of money, and they go in and do smaller projects in the country that are in rural areas where they don't have the infrastructure they need. DISI is a water pipeline project that runs from Aqaba to Amman in Jordan. I was recently talking to them. We're about to perhaps work with them on expanding the capacity. It's already, way more than what they originally thought in terms of delivering water, and it has played an incredibly important role in Amman to their ability to accept refugees because it doubled the population in the area. Our Algeria desal plant is one of the largest desal plants in the region, and it is a private sector desal plant. And a lot of people think that can only be done with the public sector, but there are ways to structure projects that make them commercially viable as well as highly developmental. The last project I want to talk about very quickly is our Belize project. Some of you may have read about this in some of the project finance magazines. DFC provides political risk insurance for some projects, and that's what turned the tide for this one. The government of Belize had commercial debt that was at a very high interest rate. The Nature Conservancy came to them and said, if we can work with DFC to bring that interest rate down by issuing new bonds in capital markets with DFC PR political risk insurance, would you spend some of the money you save on conservation projects, marine fisheries projects in Belize? We did that for them. We brought up their risk rating for those bonds by 15 levels to a AA2 by having our political risk insurance there. We saved the government of Belize $300 million, and they dedicated $80 million of that to marine fisheries and nature conservation. Just want to wrap up also by saying that water efficiency is as important as new water resources. So where we can provide support for drip irrigation that reduces water consumption in the agricultural sector and increases food security, that's a huge benefit. We've provided funding for affordable housing in South Africa, where the developer introduced water and energy efficient fixtures and appliances and told us he saved the equivalent of 1 month's rent for each of the renters, which I think is just enormous if you're a low-income family. And finally, you know, in rural areas where water is scarce, of course, as we noted, water conservation can be critical to reducing political instability and a tendency for migration. This is a list of how we support projects. I'm not going to go over it in the interest of time, but you see that you can check us out on www.dfc.gov, and my contact information and that of my colleague Andrew Yavinsky is attached. Thank you.
Thank you very much. An impressive array of projects. We'll talk more about them. Dominic. Dominic runs the newest player, I think, in the financing realm.
Absolutely. That's why I've got the job of going last, I think, after all of these fantastic speakers. Thank you for the session today. What I like about the session is the positivity and the fact that even though it's a very difficult sector that we're working in, there's an optimism and a positivity about the future, about finding solutions which will attract in and bring in sufficient finance. And that's the role of the Sanitation and Hygiene Fund. We came into existence in July of last year, became operational at the end of last year. And our role, and I'm going to use some of the words that Machera used, is to catalyze investment into sanitation, hygiene, and menstrual health. I'm going to park menstrual health as a really important issue, but I would encourage you to watch our website. We're going to have a big global initiative coming up soon on that, but today I'll focus on sanitation and hygiene. As I said, there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about the sector, the lack of finance, and certainly when we were preparing our strategy, we spoke to impact investors, to the DFIs, to institutional investors, and they said, we just can't see a pipeline. There's nothing we can invest in. Tell us how we can come in and support and engage and finance sanitation and hygiene. So that's what we took on as our model and our challenge. And we do this through the lens of the sanitation economy. And you may know the concept of the sanitation economy. It's a very powerful advocacy tool to help partners understand. For example, when I sat down with the Minister of Water in Nigeria, we said, Minister, your sanitation economy today is worth $15 billion. By the end of the decade, that can be worth $30 billion. And that's not just an economic value, there's a human, a social value to that. It's a circular economy as well. There's opportunities for recycling of human waste. In Kenya, the sanitation economy today is worth $3 billion and can double again in the next decade. So what we're looking at, and the business model we've built, is to address a lot of the things we've been talking about. In the first instance, to deliver impact. It goes without saying, but it must be said. And to ensure that those investments are sustainable from a financial, from an O&M perspective, and also from a climate and disaster resilience perspective. And we want, it isn't that we want the SHF to be the conduit, by no means. We have partners here we're working very closely with AUSIF on their business model and how we can work together going forward. We want sanitation and hygiene to be funded in the same way and the familiarity that off-grid energy is funded today. And we've spoken to a lot of people, and if you look at our board online, you'll see there's a lot of people who have been through and led that transformation over the last 10 or 15 years in both energy and agriculture, where previously uninvestable sectors have been made investable. And we're looking to bring about that same level of transformation so that in 5 and 10 years' time, it is as common, you will see sanitation bonds, you will see packages of investment that can even interest institutional investors. And we are talking to institutional investors, to pension funds that even within their risk appetite, they are looking at opportunities because of the social and the human development side. So that's our ambition. We do this through many of the similar tools that people are deploying. We work on the enabling environment. We're starting off with 4 partner countries. Hopefully that will increase quickly. We provide a package of TA initially with some grant financing. We help them value their sanitation economy, to put that economic value, but then also to understand as government leaders, how can they become the most effective guardians and stewards of that economy, to help that economy flourish? What are the barriers to the growth of the sanitation economy? We then turn into the financing phase, and this obviously isn't a linear process, where we will then work specifically and attract in investors and help to de-risk their interest so that they can we can find a sufficient risk appetite that they can put their big toe into the sanitation sector and become more comfortable with it. And that's the discussions we're having. What we want to do is to talk to we are talking to the DFIs, to the MDBs, but also to impact investors who are active on gender lens investing, in energy and agriculture, and say, well, what will it take to shift your lens into sanitation, hygiene, and hopefully menstrual health? So that's what we're doing. We are the newest kid on the block, but we'll start making some of our initial grants. There'll be an announcement for our TA in the coming few days. That'll be made public. We're very active, we're very ambitious. We have a sky-high ambition for the sector, but realize that there's obviously a lot of hurdles to overcome. But with that vision of that same level of transformation that's been achieved in energy, in off-grid energy, we believe we can achieve the same level of transition and ambition in sanitation and hygiene and menstrual health. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic, and thanks to the entire panel. We're going to get questions from the audience and online in a minute, but I've been asked to do a first round. And I want to preface it by kind of laying out what we see in the sector, which is a lot of great ideas, a lot of funds that have been created, a lot of resources that have been put on the table, and in reality, we haven't seen a pipeline of viable projects where money has moved at scale. There are individual countries that have moved forward on this. There are some local authorities and subnational entities that have been able to move forward on this. But unlike energy, which has moved billions into their sector, we've been very modest in our achievements. So my overall question for each of you is, how is your work kind of taking into consideration that checkered history at best, and how can we move forward? And let me be more specific for each of you. So Max, given this and given the experience, you've laid out a very compelling argument for your needs, but specifically, what are the actions you're taking to try to get to what we ultimately call creditworthiness? Stoli, we've read the report. There's several other groups that have prepared similar kind of things, but how do we move from the report to real action? And what's the concrete element of this? Blending and leveraging are perhaps currently the most overused words in development in the water sector, and we don't have much to show for it. So through this report, what are we going to do different? Let me pick a few of you. Lionel, you've chosen really, you have this long history of lending at the subnational level without a sovereign guarantee. That's quite unusual. There's a big emphasis on public development banks, but ultimately the borrowers still have to be creditworthy local authorities or utilities. What can we do to unblock that bottleneck? Meryl, you kind of are almost a wholesaler. You go primarily to the private sector, and ultimately they have to deal with local government. Your life would be much easier if the service provider was much more financially efficient and the governance arrangements were quite clear. What do you see from the perspective of an impressive portfolio could be done to move this forward? Dominic is a news player. You're choosing to go into arguably the most difficult kind of investment. We have trouble bringing money into water. Bringing money into private money into sanitation is even more challenging. And you're a startup. So what are you going to do differently? And then, of course, for the AFDB, a long track record, a long history. You have this new fund. You're a little bit similar situation as Dominic. You're choosing to go into to sanitation, where we haven't had a strong track record in terms of public delivery. The service providers haven't paid a lot of attention. They have the same issues that you have in water. What is this new fund going to do differently? So I apologize if I've been too provocative, but I really wanted to kind of lay out where we see where we are in the current environment, and really pick your brains on not plans, not concepts, but how are we really going to start address this, recognizing the mistakes and challenges that we've had in the sector over the last 30, 40 years. So Max, if we can we start with you from the public side?
Thank you, Joe. You just challenged us indeed that there have been reports, very good strategies, very good policies, and what is it that we're going to do something differently? I agree with you, doing same thing and getting same result, and if you don't do it differently, obviously the result will be the same. So this time around, we say, let's be honest with ourselves. Let's do a self-assessment. What is it that has been working? Why has it not been working? And what can we do better this time with the opportunity that we have a strategy? So what already comes out is this aspect of efficiencies. We've seen that we've probably not done good enough in terms of utilizing the little that we have. For instance, those of you who've been in Malawi, you've probably noted that the current production cost, say for water, is gone up. We're putting more chemicals to purify the water that we have. And why is it the case? There's been environmental degradation. And then we say, why don't we also take care of the environment so that we manage the catchment management areas, and then the water is not as polluted, and they'll pay less on chemicals. That's just one example. And the other example is to see the areas where the issues of energy. We say, why should we be paying high electricity bills? I mean, when we could also take advantage of our access to the sun, we have just too much sunlight. Why don't we do more of solar investments? That's another thing. So really, again, we saying also as creditworthiness as a country, if we are also better organized, we look at that our governance levels are high, we gain the confidence of the partners who come in and really want to work with us. That's also another area that we're working hard to do. So indeed, this time around is business unusual. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Sitoli. What are the priorities out of the handbook, and where do you see promise in breaking through on this?
So as Mark said, these are very provoking questions, Joel. Thank you so much for leading us through them. Ministers come and go. The handbook stays. So hopefully this can continue to have a culture that leads into practice all the time. Now, one other level that's really critical in getting consistency in what we're doing, because I think it's about consistency. I think we know the problems, we know solutions in a good number of places, but how can you have a cadre of people that will actually start and take that process A to Z without stopping even when the political cycle changes? So the director generals, colleagues like Max and others can be really crucial in taking this forward. In SWA, what we've done is to focus on creating a really good and durable relationship between the finance ministry and the sector ministry, so that the finance ministry can be very open to the sector ministry and say, this is the reason things are not working. And the sector ministry can also openly speak to the finance ministry. So we do these conversations. We've done it now for about 10 countries. And in a good number of them, they've moved into identifying very specific bottlenecks and trying to resolve those bottlenecks. So there's a long way to go. I think it's about relationships, it's about consistency, it's about working with the right cadre in terms of leaders, director generals, going to permanent secretaries, and making sure that they have things that they could show results for. Thank you so much.
So, Ministry of Finance, get them involved.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Meryl, you have an impressive portfolio, but how do you get from millions to billions?
It's interesting. We set a goal about a year ago of doing $250 million of water projects by 2024. About halfway through the year, we moved it to $500 million as our goal because we were clearly going to exceed it. I don't want to commit us to this, but I actually think we're going to hit $1 billion in terms of our financing for the water sector very soon. So I think that the opportunities are there in so many ways, and I've talked about some of them, but just to answer this question, I'll talk about privatization of the water sector in 3 MENA countries and how it's differing. So in one country, there were 5 sets of bidders, private sector bidders that wanted and were expected to bid on the privatization. When the terms and tender came out, it was clear they were not going to be the tenor and terms that were expected. And so the bidders have all pulled back from bidding, and the government's going to have to retrench and come out with a new bid, a new tender. That's one country. In another country, $2 billion worth of private sector privatization for the water sector is coming. I've talked to the minister there. We know that there's discussion internally about pricing. They've got to get that right to get the private companies to bid. In Morocco right now, we're expecting a $3 billion water sector privatization bid to come out. There are 6 very strong private sector teams that are expected to bid on that in the next couple of months. And I think that's going to come through solidly. So I think a lot depends on when you are privatizing your water sector, be sure you understand the market and make sure that what you're asking for is financially viable.
You're not advocating for the total privatization of the water sector, I know. So, but
No.
What are the key ingredients of the local off-takers of those investments?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
So you're making investments in private operators that are providing a public service. There's an interface between the private operator and the public provider. What's key? What key elements do you see in terms of the public provider having to have so you have an equal relationship, a credible relationship, and a sustainable relationship?
Well, of course, first they have to be completely open about what the market actually is. The information has to be available. I talked to a major EPC contractor, Bechtel actually, about why they weren't investing in or doing work in projects in some of the sub-Saharan Africa countries. And they're saying they don't understand the market, and so they have to price high. And when they price high, they get beaten by the Chinese contractors, for example. So more information that is valid about the market is absolutely essential up front. And if the public sector can do a better job of providing that, they will have more support from private sector entities. And I think, you know, not cherry picking, if you're a public sector utility, not cherry picking the best deals for your public sector and then trying to foist off on the private sector the ones that aren't viable is probably the other opportunity. But I'm seeing some really strong opportunities for water sector privatization. It's really quite impressive.
Okay. Lionel, your work through the public development banks obviously has also an interface with public providers. Tell us what's the landscape and what needs to change in order to enhance your investments opportunities?
So I won't answer at national level, but I would have said the same as Max. I mean, if you want to finance the water sector, spend your time with the Ministry of Finance, not with the sector actors. At sub-sovereign level, where you mentioned that AFD is working, that's true that there are not that many international actors being able to finance that directly utilities or cities. Still, if I can be a little provocative, just like you were, I don't think the major bottlenecks is on the offer side. I mean, if you have a utility which is working fine, which has a good balance sheet and everything, he will find financing, be it AFD, be it a national development bank, being a commercial bank. I mean, it doesn't make a difference actually whether it's a public or a private utility.
But we don't have many of those, right?
We don't have that many. I think it's estimated about 15% of the utilities are bankable. They can endebt themselves. So where to act? This is it. It is improving, well, the environment, of course, and also the performance. So that's a key. That's a key aspect of our involvement with the utilities. We work on reducing costs, improving tarification, reducing non-revenue water, and so on. I mean, like, we're working on the financial figures. This is where you have to start. And so when they are not able yet to endebt themselves, we try to start with smaller operations, with more technical assistance, with more concessionality in the process. But this is where you have to support them, I think, and really this is where the bottleneck is at the time.
So you're saying get the enabling environment, right?
Yeah, of course. Enabling environment, but also that's at the national level or sometimes at the local level, but mostly also the performance itself. So it's not only this is the culture of performance within the utility.
Okay. Chira, how is the new fund, again, dealing with sanitation, going to overcome these bottlenecks that we've seen over the last couple decades?
All right. The way I see it is that we really, first of all, need to be informed by data, by the facts on the ground. I mean, Dominic just mentioned that, for example, Nigeria has a sanitation economy of 15 billion. Kenya about 3 billion, and I'm sure we can go around all the countries and identify what the opportunity is in the sector. So if you break that down, you see where the opportunities are, where the challenges are. And we want to go out and do assessments because we all appreciate, like in Africa, countries are at different levels of development. The market capabilities, opportunities are not the same. Some countries are way behind. They need more kind of reforms, building institutions and building knowledge and capacity. Others are already beyond that. They're ready to move into investment. So we'll be able to go out there and identify where these opportunities are and develop a plan for where we see scalable investment opportunities and work with small and medium enterprises, not just the public sector, work with private sector, because I mean this sanitation sector, if we go to most cities, you will see that they're private operators already. What is the scale that they can build up their operations and their capacity in those countries? Without knowing where the opportunities are, then we just be sitting here looking for opportunities. But we must go out there ourselves, and fortunately, sitting in the DFI, we're able to do that because we're already sitting in all these countries. We can collect that data and be able to analyze it and identify and also engage in dialogue. Because this is key also at the country level, subnational level, to engage in a conversation with the authorities to open up the markets and environments to the growth of SMEs and private sector in providing service.
So this is where your grant money, your initial TA is so critical.
Exactly. We want to focus first on that, build pipelines based on that knowledge, and then bring in investment.
Okay. Dominic, same space.
Yeah, I think, look, I said we need to be optimistic, and we do. It is a challenging sector, especially in the subsector of sanitation. But we aren't, and I don't think any of us are, being blindly optimistic. And there's three reasons why we should be positive. In sanitation, this is happening now, this revolution, this change is happening in India. The sanitation economy there is 65 billion. There are SMEs that exist now that did not exist 5 years ago that are now investable, listed on the stock exchange. So that is that transformation is happening in India. So that's the first point. Secondly, there are direct parallels to draw on solutions where other sectors have been made investable over the last 10 years. So we've brought, we need to bring all of that learning. Thirdly, that financing institutions are interested. They're willing to learn about the sector, to get over the aesthetics of sanitation and to get into the detail and to understand what are the metrics, what are the returns on investment, what are the challenges. How do we get investments at scale? A single investment is never going to hit the threshold for a bankable investment. Those can be packaged at a national, even multinational level or regional level. They become investable. we're talking to the commercial bankers in Africa and Asia, and they're interested. And this is where issues of currency come in. The sanitation can and should be financed locally through local finance institutions. Same as Machera, and we're working directly together, so you hear the same language on this for work in Africa. At the end of our intervention and work with the government, there will be an investable pipeline. Those are investment-ready programs and projects ready to move. They may be early stage, they may be, have quite a long lead-in time, but that's the objective that we want to get, and to work with investors. And I was at the African Bank for 3 years, so that's what we have a lot of the same language. But working with your investors from day one is so important, bringing them along with you on the journey of what are the challenges, what are the issues in the enabling environment, and how do you bring those together as you co-develop and co-design an investment proposition. And there's a high degree of willingness from the financing institutions to learn. We need to tap into that.
Okay. We have about 15 minutes for questions, both from online and from the audience. So please put your hand up. Be quick, be provocative, and push the envelope.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I'm Alex Knezevich, Managing Director of the Toilet Board Coalition. We are focused on business solutions to the sanitation crisis. Over the last 7 years, we built the world's leading accelerator for sanitation SMEs. And what we've seen in that, because we pair them with multinational corporations, and they spend a year together to learn about each other and strengthen each other's businesses. What we've seen is that those partnerships can unlock systematic demand. So when then the MNC integrates that SME into their at-scale supply chain, it unlocks that systematic demand, which then enables investment. And I'm not going to give examples now, but the question I keep debating who it should be for, if it's Machera or Dominique or Meryl, is how do we integrate this kind of thinking about the private sector? How, they're off-take agreements or taking the output products from the sanitation economy. How do we integrate that into this kind of lending so that we're building that local business ecosystem while engaging that global corporate funding to solve this challenge? So I'm not sure who to ask it to, maybe Machera.
I'm going to take a series of questions. So the question really is how to take sanitation and leverage commercial financing, if I understand it correctly. Okay, please.
Hi, I'm Paul Hicks. I'm from Catholic Relief Services, and I helped design and set up the Azure source capital, the fund that Meryl had mentioned that provides financing for local banks who are on lend to water service providers in Central America. The big question that we have had for ourselves and that we're working on, but the question for the panel is measuring impact metrics. And I find in the finance space, a lot of it is about how much are we leveraging, and very focused on getting from millions to billions in terms of investment. But how do we really see that? How are we measuring that and seeing the impact and ensuring that all of this investment is actually leveraging what we want to see in terms of access to water and sanitation?
So more transparency on the actual investments, data, information, is that what you're asking? Okay, please.
Hello, Boris Ochoa Tokachi from Forest Strength. Joel, it's interesting that you mentioned energy because I think a lot of the investment in energy now comes from new sources, but in terms of water, we cannot really change water for something else. And we can try to find new sources like groundwater, and that is something that we can start investing on. But I'm wondering how we think about degrowth. Not only increasing efficiency, which is something that Meryl mentioned, but actually how can we make a business case, but looking towards the future in which we have to actually reduce water consumption. We have to reduce water demand.
So reuse and circular economy and all the new technology and how to fund it. And yeah, okay. More questions? Way in the back, or okay.
Okay, my name is Yongdok Jo from the K-Water and Asia Water Council Secretary General. I'm really impressed about discussion about finance for the sanitation and water supply. And you know, in order to attract some private sector, it's not easy one for the sanitation, because I have a lot of experience in Asian country, and no private sector want to involve for those projects. But how we can give some attraction for the private sector? And I think some of the panelists mentioned about we mentioned about the branding finance, and what are you thinking about the branding project? So if you're combining some sanitation and energy project and water supply and some of the other the project, if you combine and give some attraction, give some benefit to the private sector, and at the time the private sector want to involve those projects. So if you have some great idea and comment, I want to listen for that.
Okay, thanks. And we have one more in the back because we only have 10 minutes for answers.
Hello, my name is Riyad Imam Mahmood. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm a founder of a small water company in Bangladesh and also a country director of a Dutch-based international NGO named Max Foundation. My water company, it is a startup. Its name is Max Social Enterprise. I am facing a challenge, particularly for financing. I already built 60 water schemes in Bangladesh, which are 70 household size serving. With Dutch government funding. But the challenge is that I was looking funding in Bangladesh and also institutional funding organization, banks everywhere. But there is no policy that can finance water supply or sanitation companies and in startup. This is the biggest challenge and risk that I may fail in future if I don't get a real financing support. And this support is needed on a certain scale. You know that water and sanitation business is not so easy, and it is not like other commodities that you can sell in the market. It needs as much as lowest rate of interest, not more than 4%. But no institution is ready to finance on that rate.
Okay, I think I understand, and I have some ideas for you, but we'll talk, including talking to Meryl after this. But
thank you.
Okay, what's the one online? Okay, please patch them in. We're going to whiz through these answers. You're going to be very impressed how quickly you go. Sorry. Online?
The lightning round.
Yes. Online? Can you read it?
Yeah, well, Imam, can you come off mute? Okay,
All right, we're going to do quick rounds. So the questions, just for everyone, including you, Max, are really about integrating sanitation into the capital markets, really looking at more transparency on the impact of private sector financing, looking at the whole question around reuse and the circular economy and investment opportunities there, real examples around blended and leveraging finance and what some of the challenges are, and then if someone wants to finance a new water utility in Bangladesh, there's a number of people in the room who I think will come to you at the end. Please, who wants to start? Meryl.
Sure. So on the sanitation side, we actually financed a company called Sanergy, which is fairly well known, and we're probably going to do more with them. What their business model is, for those of you who don't know, is providing equipment for human waste facilities, and then using that human waste, turning it into fertilizer and making money off of the fertilizer they use for the agriculture. An interesting opportunity came to me not too long ago from a major US toilet manufacturer that does high-end toilets, that said they had developed a new technology that was waterless that they wanted to introduce into the developing country, and they wanted to work with Sanergy. So I just think there are some interesting opportunities to expand the investment in that area.
Thanks. Private sector, we have to learn different language around the same issue, and this relates to the M&E question. We've been talking to the private sector to understand what their metrics are. They're very different to the metrics we report on to the Dutch and the Swiss governments, but very, very different. But we're working out how do we bring those together so there can be some commonality. But I think there's a lot of learning to be done there. The other element is accountability and reporting to beneficiaries, communities are engaging with, and that has to be a dimension as part of an overall program, and we're trying to look at that. On the really important point that sanitation does not exist in a vacuum. When we talk about sanitation investments, the reality is they will be part of something else. Most often water, possibly energy, possibly agriculture, possibly an infrastructure project. So when we talk about sanitation investments, it could well be a component of a much larger investment, which is also a great way of de-risking the element in sanitation. And I think that's it. Private sector, just learning the language, finding a place, finding the commonality.
Okay, Lionel. Yes.
Yeah, okay, very quickly. Well, let's not forget that the private sector is very present in the sector anyway. I mean, if you had no private sector, there would be no activity today. I mean, they built your pipe, they built your pumps, they install it and everything. So they are the sector. Nevertheless, in terms of sanitation, maybe to mention one example, I think that was one of the limitation of the total sanitation approach, which was really like a demand-driven strategy. Like people should ask for infrastructure for instruments of sanitation, and first of all stop defecation. But we were lacking an offer strategy, and we've been working in some countries. I'm thinking of Mauritania, for instance, like trying to have a global project where at the same time you push the demand, but also you facilitate the offer. You can do that. It's not so easy if you don't want to mix the market, but you can like have indirect subsidies to local providers so that they can sell their equipment at a lower price. So there are mechanisms like that. I think it's important to work on both at the same time.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Max to come on the screen, and while people are doing that, Cheru, do you want to address some of this? Oh, you got off way too easy.
Not really. I mean, look, I don't want to repeat what's been said already for the interest of time. So.
Sure.
You talked about water, usage and the need to reduce it. And utilities make their money based on how much water they sell, and the business model is not really geared toward water reduction. And they also are not likely to pick up new technologies. So that's why I think a lot of the work has to be done by the private sector, so that business model of a utility that wins by selling more can be addressed by a private sector entity that wins by selling less.
Okay, all right. And Max?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, at the mention of involvement of the private sector and sanitation issues, it's one of the things that we are also trying here in Malawi to see how best we could get the private sector participate. We're trying to kind of allow some private sectors also to do some kind of try out their business model where they're connecting to the sewage systems, getting support of managing the fixed lines and the like. It's still something that's still new. We are still learning also, but it's very important, I think, that the private sector also has to play a role on sanitation matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max, and thank you very much to the entire panel. I hope we were provocative. I've been asked to try to start wrapping up, and I'm going to ask Dr. Ru to also come up, but let me take a couple minutes. Please come up. But while he's coming to the stage, I've been asked to try to wrap this up, and for some of you, this is going to be the same old story, I'm afraid. We talk a lot about raising private capital. It's incredibly sexy right now to talk about blending and leveraging and blue bonds and green bonds and climate bonds and microfinance. But the reality of this situation is, compared to other sectors, we're not even spending our public money efficiency. We've recently completed a study on public expenditure reviews. The expenditure execution rate of public money that is allocated in our budgets is 72%. 65 countries over 15 years. That means we're leaving 28 cents on the dollar unspent of public money. It's very difficult to bring in private money when you're not spending your public money very efficiently. We know what we need to do, and this is the positive aspect of this, what you're saying, Dominic. I think we need to do two things. Our service providers, public or private, local government, irrigation agencies, utilities, whatever they are, they need to be technically and financially efficient. We know what that means. Someone mentioned 15 or 18% of utilities are creditworthy. Creditworthy means over 1.2%, so they have money to pay off debt. 15%, that's pretty awful. But we know if you decrease non-revenue water, if you look at efficiencies in your staff, if you can look at completely collecting the revenue that's in your tariff, that moves almost up to 80%. So we know what to do. It's not a mystery, we're just not doing it. And when we're chasing the money, we're not spending the money and time to develop the technical and financial efficiency. I want to talk about the other side on the foundational. That's the governance, institutional, and regulatory environment. And that's the really tough stuff. You have to make sure there's clear transparency in terms of who owns these utilities. You're not going to get a borrower to talk to you if you don't understand who's raising tariffs. Who can fire the CEO? Who's on the board? Who can appoint the board? These institutional arrangements are not clear and transparent. So until we get to that point, it's going to be very difficult to start leveraging money. And personally, and this is going to be odd coming from a multilateral development bank, the less we talk about money and the more we talk about really digging down on this enabling environment, the better off we're going to be in a sector. And it's hard work. It's very nice to sit in the offices of a pension fund or an insurance company and drink coffee and design schemes. I've spent half my career doing it. I've spent the other half trying to spend that money, and it's not working. The hard part and the best part of my job is sitting with service providers and trying to figure out how to fix the governance arrangements, how to get non-revenue water down, how to get collections up. And if we do that hard work, we really can unleash the money. So we know what to do, we know the path going forward, we just have to buckle down and get to it. So with that, I'm going to open and let Dr. Ru close our session, please.
I would like to extend my warmest greetings to all the respected participants and experts today. I am Ryu Hyung-ju, Executive Vice President of K-Watt. Because of global challenges like the climate crisis, the value of water to provide the relevant solutions to those challenges is greater than even before. The severity of water-related disasters are increasing, both in terms of intensity and frequency worldwide. Furthermore, population increase and urbanization have led to a rapid rise in demand for water. It is evident that there is a great need for sustainable water management solutions. In this regard, it is highly meaningful that the experts are gathered here for this seminar. During the 2022 Stockholm World Water Week, meaningful discussions were held on effective investment models to address growing demands for sustainable water resource management. With the first session last week and the two sessions today, we shared cases and experiences from around the world. and identified not only the direct investment effects from the returns or infrastructure development, but also the direct socio-economical impact of the water investment. Additionally, experts analyze possible ways to attract more investment from the private sector. Through the sharing of various cases of investment models, such as climate finance and public-private blended finance. Lastly, we discussed the facilitation of investment of national governments and the public development banks, and identified various financial solutions to provide attraction for private investment. Recognizing the importance of water and sanitation to achieve the sustainable development goals, it is in my firm belief that the role and the cooperation of the experts and the stakeholders who are gathered here today are important. I hope that private investment in the water sector is expanded by developing public-private investment models based on the effective financing strategies of governments and international organizations. These investment will help facilitate responses in the water sector due to the climate crisis and enhance the sustainable management of the water and the sanitation. K-Water has been working as the facilitator for the global water project based on our water management capacities accumulated for more than 50 years. Furthermore, we have been developing sustainable investment models based on our experiences from various investment projects, including the Karian water supply project in Indonesia and the Tina River hydropower project in the Solomon Islands. To conclude, I strongly hope that collaboration among various stakeholders will be expanded to facilitate private investment through the advanced development of investment models in the water sector. Thank you.
So I want to thank all the panelists, and I want to thank the audience. I think it's been an excellent conversation. I do shamelessly want to make a plug. After this, there is a session at the World Bank booth on governance issues related to the financing that we were talking about. It's very informal. It's at the bank booth. There's a study out and a process to get better governance around. So if you have the time, please drop by. Otherwise, there's a ton of sessions here. Enjoy your day, and thank you very, very much. And thanks to the organizers. It's been a great session, and thank you, the audience.